Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are watching or listening around the world. It's the latest in our series with myself, Martyn Lee, and Nikk EV Nikk on YouTube, talking to the 12 Supremos of 2021 in the EV and energy industry. And if you thought our last guest, Robert Llewellyn, had a claim to be the electric vehicle OG, well, tonight Robert has competition because Nikki has been talking and making content about electrification longer than any of you have been thinking about it. Nikk, good evening. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. And it's really great to have Nikki on because, you know, it's a pleasure to work with a real, true journalist professional for a change. You know,
unlike us two chances that are somehow still doing this. Nikki, welcome along to the show, and we really appreciate you giving up some time. What's the time where you are?
It's just gone noon, which is why I have this excellent piece of polenta garlic flatbread that the wonderful Kate Walden-Elliott brought to the Transport Evolved Welcome Barbecue this past weekend, and she left it here. So I've been nibbling on that. It's new. It's kind of hot outside as well. It's about 30 degrees.
See, you are a rare honorary American, who would give us it in our language, because normally it's like 80 or not, and I'm like, I don't know what this is in real money, so we can, you know, you translated for us. You've done the thinking. Right,
exactly. So, like, it's kind of weird because my kids, when they moved to the States, my son was, oh goodness, he would have been 12, I think, and my daughter was 11. So when we moved over, my son still stuck with metric for a while and then switched to imperial. My daughter, who didn't really care about measurements for anything, switched to imperial almost immediately, and she does temperatures in imperial. My wife speaks both. And I kind of go, oh, do I have to give it to you in imperial? Okay, I'll give it to you in metric. But of course, I still use miles, and so we have to do miles and kilometer conversions when we're working on air, and we just write it down because I forget it all too often. But yeah, it's a bit hot. It's a bit hot.
Oh, well, I mean, at least where you are, you kind of built for the heat because places have aircon and things. When it's the 1 week of hot weather over here, we can't cope. I mean, the train tracks buckle. We all just sit outside complaining about it being too hot, which is, you know, a change from us all complaining about it being too cold. But there we go. Anyway, let's talk about electric cars.
I was going to say, Martin, you'd think that was the case, but we have no air conditioning in the state of Oregon as a default, certainly in the upper kind of Portland area. So I live in just outside Portland, Oregon. We're in kind of the Pacific Northwest. It's traditionally like UK weather all the time. It's wet and cold and wet and there. And then because of climate change, suddenly we're getting heat waves. It hit I'm going to do that British thing that British newspapers do.
Oh, we're already
hit
getting a British
115 degrees Fahrenheit a couple of weeks ago. Have you noticed British newspapers do metric measurements until we get a heat wave and then they go, it was 110 the other day?
Do you know, if anyone wasn't sure we were British, now they're convinced we're British. We're talking about the weather.
The weather. We're 5 minutes in.
But anyway, it's so hot that, you know, we just have to put window units in and stuff.
Wow. And I feel like we're sort of looking behind the curtain tonight, because although people can find videos of you, you know, online where you're doing like the making of, or you're doing sort of more, you know, vlogging style, we are used to seeing all the stuff you make being so polished and like just like the telly. But tell people who are watching this tonight about the journey that you've been on to now to making this kind, because it's not just you working on this, but for anyone watching this that wants to know your story.
All right, so my story starts back in 1980 something when I was a precocious little kid. So I was born at the end of the 70s. I know, I don't look it. I was born in 79, and I grew up the youngest of 3 kids by a considerable margin. My dad was a dairy herdsman, so he was paid to look after cows out on the marshes of the Waveney Valley in Suffolk, although I was actually born in Norfolk. And when I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, I saw a picture of an electric car in a book called The Tree of Knowledge. Do you remember that? Used to get it through the newsagents. It was a
Yeah.
thing you get in like weekly volumes, and then you kind of put it together, and then you have an encyclopedia that sits on your wall, because, you know, we're talking pre and Carter here. And I would love to have the particular edition that had this Enfield electric in. And I remember seeing it had a cutaway picture, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool. I like electric things. I was always a nerdy kid, you know, and I'd kind of read my way through the fiction section of the local library bus before I was out of primary school. So I used to then read non-fiction books. And that was kind of a cool thing. I loved tinkering. My first electrical circuit when I was 9 was I went and bought some electrical components with my pocket money. I had a soldering iron that belonged to my dad that somehow I convinced him to let me use. And I couldn't afford breadboard. So I got some wire and a cornflake packet and poked holes in it, and then made an op amp for radio. I've always been interested in radio and TV ever since I was really little. And then fast forward to the 90s, where the early 90s, when we had that really terrible flood in East Anglia about 91, 92, that flooded the marshland that my dad grazed the cattle on. And the farmer said, we can't afford to keep the cows anymore because there's nowhere for them to eat during the summer, because it was salt water that flooded a freshwater marshland and basically killed everything. So they sold the cows. Dad lost his job, and I had to move to just outside of Norwich. And that was kind of a gut-wrenching moment for me, because I loved growing up in the Waveney Valley. It was very bucolic. And then suddenly I'm in this less fun place. I mean, we went to a farm just outside Norwich, and my mum still lives there, but it was a very different experience. And then kind of that started that ticking off. What caused that? All of the other major events, obviously, like the infamous hurricane and all of the big snowstorms, these once in a lifetime events that seem to be happening more frequently. So I went to music college. I was a professional musician. I went to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, was an oboist there for 4 years, and then I graduated, became a music teacher in Lincolnshire, and drove around Lincolnshire and taught kids how to play musical instruments. Then my wife moved over to the UK, and we moved down to Bristol eventually, and I continued working there for a while as a music teacher. But for health reasons and other things, I kind of stopped teaching and got into EVs back in the kind of the would have been 2000 and maybe 2005, 2004, 2005. I was going to convert my Morris Minor to electric, which was a car that I'd owned for a year or two. Always been into classic cars, always been a big petrol head. Stripped it down, and it was so far gone with rust that I didn't have the skills to weld it back together. And ended up buying something called the Flying Banana, which was a 1998 City L electric car that had a top speed of about 30 miles an hour, was absolutely terrible. It was a 3-wheeler. It looked like the illegitimate love affair between a Sinclair C5 and an Intercity 125. It had a roof that went up like that. And that was my first EV, and I put lithium-ion batteries in it, made my own wiring loom to put in a new BMS, and it kind of went downhill from there. So at that point, I started working for a podcast called the EV Cast, with some guys out of America, and I was one of their guest presenters. And then I transitioned to kind of doing Transport Evolved on my own. So 2010 is really when I set Transport Evolved up officially. And we did what you guys are doing now. We did effectively a weekly podcast where we talked about the news in the world of EVs. I had guests on like Robert and Chelsea Sexton and John Volker, and some of the OG people who were part of the Don't Crush campaign in the US. That obviously started off a whole load of stuff. Chelsea Sexton is probably the person responsible for getting me into the EV journalist space, because she reached out to me, I think probably in about 2009, and said, hey, there's this guy coming to London that I think you should meet. His name is John. I think you'd get on. And I'm like, okay. So John reached out and we agreed that we'd meet for breakfast at Paddington Station. So I got the train up from Bristol to Paddington Station. We had breakfast at Paddington Station and discovered that aside from being a journalist, John was also a keen Morris Minor fan, which is kind of like a thing in my world. So we hit it off. And then about a week later, he reached out and he said, hey, would you like to write for Green Car Reports as a journalist? And I'm like, yes. So I started writing for them. Transport Evolved kind of was a fun hobby. For reasons that I won't go into, I ended up no longer working for Green Car Reports. I was offered a job somewhere else, went to work for them. That job didn't work out. And unfortunately, they'd replaced me with someone else, even though it only took me a couple of weeks to realize that I'd made a bad career choice. So I started to put text-based news on Transport Evolved, as well as the podcast. And then in 2013, I came up with an idea with the wonderful Mark Chatterley. Hello, Mark, if you're watching this. He's based in Gloucester, called TEN, Transport Evolved News. And the idea was it was a pun. It was supposed to be 10 minutes in length. But if you watch 10 now, it's nearly 20 minutes in length because we have so many news stories to cover. And that's kind of the path that we've gone. I had previously worked for a while in tech journalism as well. So I'd got a kind of a semi-background in tech journalism as well. I'd worked for Mac Format back when they used to have the magazines. I was their disc editor and I used to do their tech tutorials. So I've kind of had that background in journalism. And thanks to John Volker and Green Car Reports and Chelsea Sexton, I was kind of trained in that traditional journalism vibe. And I've brought that forwards to where we are today. And Transport Evolved, we aim to cover the world of cleaner, greener, safer, and smarter transportation. I don't want to say just EVs because that would be stupidly arrogant. You know, if someone comes along with an amazing new tech tomorrow that doesn't use the material resources that EVs use in their construction, but is low carbon, I would be a fool not to go, hey, this could be another alternative. So we've always wanted to cover car technology and help people away from fossil fuels and towards something that is better for the planet and better for their wallet. And I guess that's where Transport Evolved is today. We currently have 2 full-time members of staff. There's me and Erin, who is our animator and PA. And then we have 3 3 part-time hourly staff. That's Kate Walton-Elliott, who's a good friend of mine. We've worked together for years. We nearly had a TV show together back in something a long time ago. We used to nearly had a TV show together with Granada. That was going to be about classic cars, not EVs. And then we have Kit, who is our social media manager. And then we have Winter, who's another recent hire, who's another presenter who works on the channel. And eventually we want to grow it even more, but we're not obviously at that point yet.
So you've got a full journalist background. You did a little bit of proper writing, and then you decided to go on the young hip YouTube. What made you go from being turning it into a hobby into a full-time sort of YouTube career?
So the transition kind of started in 2010 because I adopted my 2 kids in 2010, 2011. And so I needed to be around during the evenings and when they were at the local primary school. And I was working as a music teacher originally, but I hated the paperwork and I hated the politics. I was one of those teachers who, if you turned up to the lesson and you'd done the work, great. If you came to the lesson and went, I really don't understand, I've tried really hard and I just don't get it, and they were willing to listen and learn, great, good job. But I left teaching because it became apparent, especially in the music world, that lots of parents give their children expensive music lessons. The children couldn't be asked to practice, had no interest in learning. And I have no interest in teaching someone who doesn't want to learn. I have it's like willful ignorance is one of my biggest buttons. You know, if someone is being willfully ignorant about something and they're not willing to change their mind, they're not willing to think about something critically, then forget it. So I wanted to have a different career. I've always been interested in radio. So I don't know if the BBC were willing to acknowledge this, but back in 1994, actually 94 through 98, I used to work at the local radio station. And when I say work, I mean I was a teenager who was there, who was allowed to do things, and I wasn't paid, but they let me do stuff that probably they shouldn't have let me do. But I used to work at the local radio station, so I've had a background in radio and broadcast before as well. So I kind of just pulled all of those things together, and I don't mind being on camera. I hate looking at myself on camera, and I hate editing my own videos, but I enjoy explaining things to people. That's why I do what I do.
Yeah, but Martyn used to work at a little small local radio station at one point, didn't you, Martyn?
A couple of them. But it's interesting. You go back to the 1990s in radio, and when you start out, the hope for some people that want to be a presenter is that maybe you'll get to do the weekend overnight show, and maybe if you're better, you can do the weekday overnight show. But ultimately, the gatekeepers of that decision were middle-aged white men, and the media landscape has changed a lot, but really the cultural hegemony that they were interested in maintaining was that middle-aged white men would control that sort of pipe of talent coming into the industry. And so that's just the way it was. And so thank goodness so much has changed, and so much still needs to change. I can't believe I'm saying that in 2021.
Gosh.
But you have, with YouTube, podcast, etc., you have a way of reaching a global audience, and there's nobody who is that gatekeeper for you. So you've created a business around telling stories about something you're passionate about, and you've managed to, thanks to the internet, but if it hadn't been for the internet, so many people wouldn't be able to tell their stories. And so that's what I find, really interesting about your journey, your business, as it's become. But it was a passion about telling a story about something that you cared about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in the UK, there was not so much pressure really, because my wife ran a business. She was an IT consultant, and so she was effectively a freelancer, and I could be a freelancer. And because of UK law, we were able to have an umbrella company that basically combined both sides of the business. And so there was not a huge amount of pressure on me to make a huge profit, because it was like, I'm providing a service and we are earning enough to make ends meet. That's really all we cared about. But then when we decided to emigrate to the US in 2015, things changed dramatically. So for those who don't know, my wife is American, as am I now as well, although I don't sound it. I'm British and American. The process of naturalization is a weird one. We can go into that at another time. But when we moved, I guess, back to the US for my wife, or to the US for me, because I was married to an American, I was eligible to work and I could get a visa. But I really didn't want to go back to working for someone else. I'm kind of a bit of a free spirit. And so I turned around and I said to my audience, okay, look, in order for me to survive in the US with Transport Evolved, I need to turn it into a proper business. I don't want to be someone who is funded by ad placements and sponsorship deals. I'm not an influencer. I want to be a journalist, and I want to try and give people the information they need. So I turned around and said to my audience, so what we're going to do is we're going to use something called Patreon, which was in its really early days back then. We're going to do a Patreon, and I'm going to try and minimize the amount of ads that we have on our channel. We'll give you perks. And if you support what we are doing, I will be able to continue to do this and make it a full-time job. How about it? And the EV owning community responded very positively. And that's what's enabled us to grow the business. And it's why we keep tight reins on stuff. It's why we don't do a whole lot of sponsored content. And it's been wonderful seeing Robert's channel grow as well. because I remember having that conversation with Robert. I think I was the one who said, Robert, you need to go and look at Patreon, because I think that will give you a gateway into doing more independence. Because back then he was doing a lot of heavily sponsored stuff. And I seem to recall that conversation we'd had, I can't remember which event it was. I mean, we've known each other since 2007, I think. So, that conversation about going away from linear TV and radio, as you said, Martyn, and going towards something that's more independent. And there's been positives and negatives to that. Let's not kid ourselves. The positives is that we get to broadcast content that we know is relevant and applicable to our audience. The negative is that it can also become an echo chamber, and you get people who are completely fanatical about one thing or another, spreading misinformation, spreading conspiracies, spreading all of those other things that comes with having a wonderful World Wide Web.
Yeah. I think I took the wind out of someone's sails this week, because he emailed me to say he's sick of me on my podcast because I talk about negative Tesla stories, and I politely replied and was like, hey, there's some amazing podcasts out there. Ride the Lightning is brilliant, and there's some great financial ones if you want, but I'd really appreciate if you didn't listen to me anymore, because it sounds like I upset you, and so I really appreciate you taking the time, but I really recommend you unsubscribe today. And I think it takes the wind out of people's sails, because it's like I don't have that thicker skin. I think we all like to think that we can shake things off, but I don't need people emailing. I was at a festival over the weekend with my 3-year-old son, and I stupidly checked my emails, and there's a guy having I gave him permission to come into my world on my weekend off and really bother my mental health. And so I was like, hey, I'd really appreciate if you just don't listen to me and don't contact me again. Probably a nice guy, probably would be nice in person, but was very rude, complaining about the fact that I just give balanced stories about, his particular, he owns a Tesla. And so that's an interesting thing. And how do you, there's pros and cons, but, how have you learned to cope with the fact that people are keyboard warriors these days?
That's a really tough question, isn't it? How honest do I want to be?
Honest.
So the reality is that I have a team. The reality is that we got a team because I work 80 hours a week. I still work 80 hours a week, producing Transport Evolved at the level that we produce it at, with 15 to 16 shows per week. And that, for whatever reason, is the only way that we've been able to surf the YouTube monetization. Because if we produce fewer videos than that, our monetization falls off a cliff. But if we produce a huge amount of content and that churn, it keeps YouTube happy, and it helps increase our subscribers, and it helps our revenue. But one way I've dealt with that is to get someone else to moderate my comments. And we've just actually had I'm sure Winter won't mind me saying this. Winter published a video last week talking about comparing the Model S. Does the Model S Plaid have any true competitors? And it was a really cool video. And, we now revise the scripts and we try and QC everything, although sometimes I fail in that regard. And he said, he came into the chat that we have, our private chat, and was like, I don't think I'm going to read any comments on any video that I make again, because it's just negative.
Wow.
Because so we now have an agreement, a mutual agreement, although I'm really bad at sticking to it, where whoever is actually presenting doesn't read the comments, and somebody else on the team reads them, or at least vets them, so that you don't read your comments immediately, because the amount of hate that we do get on a daily basis is tough. And for me, it has been soul destroying. I don't even know how to phrase it.
Yeah.
I have to say that I've read some of the comments that you've received on a new video, and I mean, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you are part of the LGBT community. Obviously, you mentioned your wife before, so
yeah.
But you received some of the most homophobic comments I have ever seen in my entire life. Ever.
Homophobia and transphobia, and actually a little bit of a scoop for you guys, and I hope the guys don't mind me saying this. I might get told off by my team, but Transport Evolved is changing our logo officially next week, because we changed it for pride, because 90% of our team are in the LGBTQ spectrum.
Mm.
or they are a family member of or a partner of somebody who's in the LGBTQ spectrum. And so we changed the Transport Evolved logo to include the Progress Pride flag and the colors from that. And we've had such support over that change that we're keeping it. But as an out woman, trans woman who is also gay, I do get a lot of comments, and my body image has suffered. I know that my mental health is probably the worst it's ever been in my entire life. And I grew up, you know, I was an early kid. I got a lot of hate at school. I learned how to deal with that, especially being a musician and not being kind of one of the sporty kids. And even, you know, being an out person online, not on video, was pretty tough. For those who don't know, without going, you know, hugely into my background, I transitioned when I was how old was I? 19, 20 when I transitioned. So I've kind of lived this life now for half of my life, more than half of my life. And so I'm used to people dealing, you know, with the transphobia comments. I will say, though, without a shadow of doubt, transphobia and the homophobia has got markedly worse in the last 4 years. I wonder why.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
well,
and that is,
it's
yeah.
At least
So,
you didn't get 4 more years, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting how communities are becoming more entrenched and echo chamberish. You know, if I look at an example where, you know, I love Formula One. I know I love electric vehicles. I love clean green technology. I love Formula One, right? So bit of a conflict there. But over the weekend, they were racing in Hungary, and you know, Lewis Hamilton came out very strong with messages of support for the LGBTQ plus community and the treatment of people in that country. Sebastian Vettel, a multiple world champion, wore a t-shirt in support. And he got like disciplinary action by the organizers, the political pressure from that company on the, you know, either the racetrack or, you know, the governing body. And it was either like docked something. And it's like, these are the biggest names in one of the world's biggest sports, and they get slapped down because of the fear of, like, oh, so-and-so politician or so-and-so, you know, royal, you know, family leader that puts billions into whatever won't like it. And so if they're being slapped down, what chance does anyone really have to try and have a sensible conversation with people who might not see the world that you do? And so we're starting from the back foot, really.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but it's true. There's been a lot of backlash, and you know, I dropped a bit of a snide comment. The anti-LGBTQ stuff has got worse in the last 4 to 5 years. In the US, obviously, that's because of the former president Donald Trump. In the UK, it's got worse as well. As a trans person, I wouldn't want to be living in the UK right now. I live in a US state that has pretty good protections under law for me as a transgender individual. But also, you know, I live in a state that has a very low population density, and I live in the countryside for a reason. And one of the reasons is I wanted to be away from everybody, because one of the things that I don't talk about very much, and it's going to sound terrible, it sounds terrible in my head, is that when I lived in an apartment complex, I had quite a few people figure out who I was and what I did and where I lived. And that's okay. But then you start to get messages from someone going, oh, hey, I noticed you live around the corner. We could go and grab a drink together. And I'm thinking, I don't know you. And as a member of a minority community, we have to guard everything, because there are so many stories of people who didn't and bad things happened. So living out in the country allows me some anonymity in that regard. And I had a panicked moment a couple of months ago. I was on my driveway with the ID4, and somebody drove by and stopped because they saw the ID4 and they wanted to ask me questions about it, thinking I just purchased it. Then when they saw me, they realized who I was. And in the back of my head, while I'm smiling and talking to them, I'm like, I really hope that you're not one of those weird people. But, the comments do get to you. And I try and be sarcastic. I try and kind of draw in on my sarcastic, but I've also had my team tell me off and go, no, you really shouldn't be responding to this person. No. You can vent to us if you need to, but I think it's the same for. I would hate to say it, but I think it's easier for a middle-aged, cisgendered white dude to make videos about cars than it is anybody else. And kind of, if you are a woman making videos about cars, it's going to be harder. You only have to see the crap that Simone Yurt's got for her truckler video. You only have to see what other female journalists who aren't trans, who aren't queer, get for making videos about cars. And unfortunately, the world of cars is extremely sexist, extremely brotastic, and kind of you have to learn how to survive in that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to admit, reading your comments, I mean, I've got friends who are part of the LGBT community. I won't go into full details because this is a public forum, and
that's their story, right?
About their life, yeah. But because I'm that close, and they're really good close friends, I read some of the comments that you see, and I see that as a personal attack on me. And if I don't know how you stayed so strong and carried on with the YouTube channel, because personally, some of the comments I have are bad, but they're not personal. They're just. They tend to be just people having a go because they've had a bad day, but yours are really to the bone. They are hurtful, and I think you should be congratulated for carrying on the way you do, and it's impressive. I think you really do need to be applauded for the way you carry on.
Thank you. I would say that, I mean, that's part of the problem, and I'm sure we all feel this as content creators. The person you see on camera is never the person you see in the real world. There are some exceptions to that. I genuinely believe that Robert, I love him to bits. He is such a wonderful, kind, generous person. And apparently, according to my daughter, he also makes a mean cheese toastie because he made her one. He made her one once at his place. But he is about as close as I think anyone gets to being exactly the same off camera and on camera. But even he has a TV persona. And I think we all have an on-screen persona. The person you talk to on screen, that you see on screen, is very different. Like, if I told you that I am an introvert, you would probably struggle to believe that. But I am an introvert who can be extroverted. And when I turn off a camera, I need alone time to recharge. I'm kind of reading some of these comments that we're getting here in the main chat though as well. It's true. Like someone said, when you want to be away from everyone and live in the country, and then expose yourself, really. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't talk about exactly where I live.
But that's a really interesting point that person's making, because absolutely, that you should be able to do what you want with your life. If you're not hurting anybody else, you should be able to make the content you want, but also you should be able to carry on with your life. Now, I spent my career pre-podcasting and from a big overlap as well, working in radio, which does grant a huge amount of anonymity, especially when you're not working at local level, where you end up going to Fates and opening a garden centre, and you start to know people. But then when you get away from that and you work at, so unless you're a famous radio presenter, then I had a wonderful level of anonymity. I have 2 Facebook accounts. So I have the Facebook account for me, and then I have the page that I have, that I had to have because of social media, but also, the same with Twitter as well. But I never, ever shared my personal details. So it's exactly to that person that made that comment, exactly the same. I was able to do what I wanted to do, but I never shared the personal details of my home life. There were periods of time when I was doing like breakfast shows where you've got to take everything on the air, because if not, you'd have no content. So you got to talk about, my wife did this to me, and those kind of crazy zany breakfast show things. But outside of that, I really never took my personal life on it, and I don't take my personal life hugely onto the podcast. But that's everyone's right. I'd say to that person, that's everyone's right to keep public what they want and still be able to communicate, tell stories, evangelize for something that you strongly believe in, which comes full circle where we started, which is your story, your early experience, which is kind of climate change and the impact that we have on, on the planet. So yeah, I think that, well, that's how I would explain that away, that you can be both things.
Exactly. And it's interesting because we often get a lot of, and going back, this circular discussion, going back to the comments we get about people get very offended when I or Kate or Winter brings up our partner. So for reasons that are just purely coincidental, myself, Kate Walton-Elliott, and Winter are all in same-sex relationships. So when we are on camera and we are talking about our own personal vehicles, we all own EVs and drive EVs, we will say my wife or my husband in relation to our same-sex partner. And a lot of people get, you're going political, you're bringing in politics, why can't you leave your sexuality out of it? And I'm like, okay, in which case you should turn around and say to every vlogger, every journalist, you cannot talk about your partner at all, because if you want us to stop talking about our partners, you also need to stop other people from talking about their partners. And that becomes a very difficult conversation to have, but it's interesting to see how those standards exist. And one way we've tried to get around that is to just be as open and as honest about who we are, what we do, and how we do it, so that people then can't sort of try to wiggle their way in and expose us or do something terrible to us, because they're not here for that. They're here for electric vehicle content or for cleaner, greener, safer, smarter content.
Yeah. And one thing you're talking before about your Patreon members that, help keep transport alive and help you, grow the channel. But you forgot to mention your number one sponsor, which is obviously the oil industry, which are paying you thousands of money because, obviously the oil industry are going to sponsor someone who drives an electric car and has been talking about electric cars for longer than most people realize they exist. But supposedly, Nikki, you are the head oil shill and receiving all that money.
Yeah. And can't you see from my pad? Right?
Yeah, you are raking in those big bucks. Yeah.
My $3 million pad in the countryside with, the 20 acres.
Have you noticed that some of the nasty comments you receive tend to be on certain videos more than others? Or
I'm going to give you 3 guesses.
Yeah. And that, so how do you feel about those channels or the content creators out there that only make content to stay inside a kind of a bubble, an echo chamber, not because they want to, but I know people who know that a certain type of content will get 80,000 views, another type will get 5,000 views, so they now just play to the crowd, even though they're not being true to themselves, and yet they're making like 6 figures, and but they just know that it's a game, but they've worked that out, and they've got no interest in trying to be honest. They're just making money out of it, because if they just talk about Tesla all the time and say that Elon Musk is a genius, he's saving the planet, they're going to get more views, and the comments are just all reinforcing as well.
Right.
You've got no interest in doing that though, because you're as a journalist.
Right. So one of the things that's really important to us is journalistic integrity, and as a rule, nobody who works for the company has any shareholding in any company that we cover. You are allowed to own a car that you cover because you own that car. It's your personal transport, but nobody is allowed to have financial investment in any of the companies we cover. Some of the team have have investment accounts where they put retirement money in, and then the team happens to however the account works, they will invest in things on your behalf. You have no direct control over those kind of funds, mutual funds. So those are okay, but like ringing up your stockbroker and going, I want to have this in this company. That's not allowed. The other thing is we don't have advertisements or sponsorships from any company that we could potentially cover. And so if there's a company that we cover, we won't take ad money from them. So if like GM was to call us tomorrow and say, hey, we want to pay you to advertise our new electric car, we would turn around and go, sorry.
But it's fine. But if GM said, we'll fly you to New York for the New York Motor Show, which is coming up, and we'll put you in a nice hotel, there's no pressure from them to then say nice things. They do that for a lot of journalists, right?
That's your standard industry journalist junket. That's kind of one of the nice things, right? But there aren't many nice things. I mean, I will, without giving the game away and saying the name of the company in question, although how I'm going to phrase this now is probably going to give the game away as to which car company it was. Back in 2018, there was a new electric car that was launched in Japan, and I was invited over to Japan to cover it. Now, when I received the invitation at first, I thought, oh, great, it's a journalist invite. Somebody new at the company that I haven't dealt with before. No matter. I know everybody at the press team at this company. Let's do it. And after I said, yeah, sure, send me more details, they then sent me an influencer contract that said, you are not allowed to cover our competitors for 30 days. You have to do this, this, and this. And there are all these stipulations. And I went, guys, we have a problem. I'm not coming. If you expect me to sign this, I am not coming. And they kind of didn't know what was going on. And what happened, and I'm talking about this because it's a really important thing to talk about, is that was just at the start of the influencer pandemic, where influencers get access to everything and regular journalists get put on the sidelines. So, what happened was I had to reach out to the press team at the car company in question and went, so your external agency that you've hired to work with influencers has just asked me to come to the event. I would love to come as a journalist, but I'm not going as an influencer. And they actually negotiated that I could still go to Japan. I just was a journalist. They dressed down the influencer contact, whoever they were. And it was all solved. But there have been moments where I've not been invited to stuff because car companies know that I will be, or anybody else on the team will be brutally honest. If something is good, you say it's good. If something is bad, you say it's bad. And if something needs improvement or praise for, then you give that in equal measure. My job is not entertainment. And I think this is where you were going, Martyn. There's a difference between those who are in this industry for entertainment purposes or personal gain. They do what makes the money and they get rich very quickly. And then there are those of us who are like, no, I'm more interested in the progression and the story and I don't want to say integrity, but I can't think of a better way of putting it. And I think, Nikk, you are in the same boat. I know you are, Martyn. The idea of it's more important to disseminate accurate information and even to correct yourself when you make a mistake, which we try and do, than it is to make lots of money so that you can retire. We don't make a huge amount of money on the channel. In fact, I know for a fact we make a lot less than some other channels. But we're okay with that because we can go to sleep at night and go,
yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that. I mean, I'm currently doing a series of reviewing electric vehicle chargers. I'm going through every single one of them. And I've started, the reviews are honest. They talk about the good and the bad and the ugly and what needs fixing, etc. And one charge company said they were going to send me the charger for review, and then saw a couple of the other charge reviews and thought, oh, God, he's being a bit honest about these. And they rang me up and said they'll send it me and they'll pay me a set fee, but they want full editorial review. So I politely told them a four-letter word. And they've never sent it. But, I mean, at the end of the day, you just summed it up. Integrity as journalists, and I'm not a trained journalist. I've not got that history, but I have a feeling that I have a responsibility to the people that subscribe to me. That they put their trust in me, and we should put our trust in them. And I think one person who I've got to congratulate is rich rebuilds. He built a Tesla network of Tesla fanboys and Tesla fans, and then completely ripped Tesla apart in honesty, that there's bad service and everything that's gone wrong. And instead of flowing this lovely, happy Tesla world, he was honest, and he got absolutely slated for it, which was terrible.
Yeah. I have encountered plenty of people in this sector who mix content like that with entertainment content that is purposely staged. How about that? Without naming names, without pointing out people, because I don't want to put a target on my back. But there are people in the world who make content who do like the old Top Gear used to, who were like, we're going to tell this story, we've decided what we're going to say, and therefore we're going to go out of our way to make it happen. And that also feels disingenuous as well.
But that was the argument that Top Gear gave in court when Tesla sued Top Gear for writing the script that the Tesla Roadster would run out of battery, and then they would have the crew pushing it back into the garage, and that was all storyboarded or whatever is planned because somebody from Tesla had seen the script accidentally lying around. When they went to court, that was the BBC's argument, which was, but Top Gear is entertainment, and they won that case because they said, look, we're not a factual motoring program. And that was the turning point when I realized, and I was like, oh, they're going to lose this. They can't, you can't stage a roadster running out. And they won the case. And Elon's obviously still bitter because they were like, well, no, we're entertainment. And that was the turn. And then I've met people over the years. I met a guy who was a writer on Top Gear, and it was his job that if during the filming of the episode, if one of the hosts delivered the script as it was written, all the lines are written, and it didn't get a big enough laugh in the audience, they'd stop shooting, they'd pause, he would rewrite that joke, and they'd start again and do it, and they were, oh yeah, Jeremy's so funny, or whoever it was presenting whether maybe it was Matt LeBlanc, but whoever it was writing, and then you think, oh right, it's just all fiction, but it looks beautiful, and they're in the French Riviera driving supercars, and it's all in gorgeous 4K, but it's just like it's fodder to eat your dinner to, but it's
So I guess now is a good time to let slip what happened with Kate and I when we did Life in the Old Gal, which was our TV show that we never actually produced. We filmed the promo for it. And Life in the Old Gal was designed to be a TV show. I think we kind of worked with, it would have been 2004, we worked with Granada on it. And the idea was that we were going to teach university students, because we'd literally, we'd both graduated sort of 2-3 years prior, so we were in our mid-20s. We were going to show people how to do up classic cars on a budget and keep them as affordable daily drivers. And the promo we shot with Morris Minors, because that was the car we knew the best. And we got we were going to do one on a Land Rover and all these other cars that we kind of lined up, minis, a lot. And we filmed a whole day's worth of footage with a Morris Minor. And one of the things we had to do was to go around a scrapyard. We found a scrapyard near to us that was willing to work with us and film. And we would go round and find the parts we needed to fix our car. Well, you can guess what we really did. We arrived on set with a car full of spare parts that we had sourced from about half a dozen scrapyards in the region and planted them at that junkyard. So we could then go around and find them and be like, oh, this is just what we need. Oh, look, it's a whole wing. Let's buy that. And everything we did that day was fake. I mean, not everything. The advice we gave was true, but a lot of what we did was fake. I think the last the ending scene we did, it was getting dark, and they turned the lights on, and we filmed this last bit after we'd put the wing on, and it was looking good. And then we were supposed to hit the car, tap the wing of the car, good car, And we had to retake that about 20 times because every time we tapped it, the wing fell off. So there is nothing in TV in linear TV, that is, you know, even documentaries are scripted in some way. And so I think if you know that and you've had that experience of working with a film crew or working in radio, working in TV, you know how it works. But obviously in the YouTube world, you can choose to continue with that entertainment vibe or become more gritty. And we've decided to become more gritty and to do the journalistic thing. Now, it means that it's a lot harder for us to expand our business. We've had about a 100% growth a couple of years ago, and it slowed down a little bit over COVID, but we've expanded what we do and our team extensively. But we need to raise about another 50 grand this year to get a proper studio and to get proper staff on so that we can bring everybody else in full time and stuff like that. And I'm not going to lie, the potential draw of working with a sponsor, you know, someone says, hey, I've got a wallet and it's full of, you know, $50 bills. Will you come and work for us? It's really hard to turn around and go, sorry.
You see, I think it's fine to accept it as long as there's a clear definition between this is a sponsored video and this is a free independent video. And I think some YouTubers, they blur those lines as much as they can in the sponsor's interest. Now, when I've done sponsored videos in the past, they feel like an ad. It feels like I'm reading from a script. I deliberately make it feel as advert-like as I can. There's a little promotion button at the top saying this video has been paid for. In the description, it says this has been paid for by blah, blah. And there's a clear definition where some YouTubers I've seen review products, and I've had these products and know they're absolute garbage. And they've gone, this is the best thing I've ever owned. I'm thinking, you've been paid. You've been paid to say that.
So we have a rule at our channel, which is any integration that we do has to be something that we personally own or use or have experienced. Now, if an advertiser reaches out to us and says, hey, would you do an integration with us, as has happened in the last couple of weeks, and that we've not actually used the service personally, but we have friends or family who do, we might go, okay, can you give us access to your service so we can test it out for ourselves? That is acceptable because we can test it out ourselves and then we can talk about it. But we won't advertise something we haven't used, and we won't advertise something that we believe is unethical. So we did a you know, we've all been there. I've made mistakes. I was one of those YouTubers who, you know, a couple of years ago went, sure, we'll try this Raid Shadow Legends thing. And it was a complete and utter flop because my audience saw through the fact that it was even me saying this is an ad. They're like, how could you? And I think I'm so glad that Transport Evolved's audience did that because it kept me honest and it kept us honest. But these days, like, for example, if a meal kit company reached out to us, we'd be like, no, sorry, the carbon footprint of your meal kit is abominable. We're not doing that. So we have a current, we're working with a company in the US from an affiliate program called Energy Sage, and they help homeowners find local solar installation companies to work with to install solar panels on their home. We only agreed to work with them as an integration after we had personally gone through the process of putting solar panels on the roof of our home, and we paid full market value for it. We didn't get any special discounts. We didn't get anything else. We're like, we wanted to use you guys before you came to us and asked us to work with you. So we're comfortable working with you because we've used your service and we know it works. Therefore, we're happy to talk about it. But I wish more companies were like that. I wish more YouTube content creators did that. I don't think everybody does.
Yeah. So when you look at because you know, last few minutes that we've got with you, when you look at the where so not only where your channel is going, but you know, obviously the wider media is now talking about electric cars because their market share is increasing because it gets clicks. I saw a story this week about CATL, the Chinese battery maker, and I think the headline was something like Elon Musk's Tesla battery supplier is doing this, and it was like nothing to do with Tesla, but it clearly, like, oh my goodness me. So it clearly is, increasingly popular. Do you have hope or pessimism for how the wider media are covering what is dear to your heart?
I think battery breakthroughs are a big problem. And I think a lot of companies don't understand, a lot of outlets don't understand it. I think a lot of reviewers don't seem to do it. And there's a problem here, so traditionally it's got better in the last 5 years. But it used to be that the car journalists would not review EVs. And so they would hand it over to whoever happened to be the new boy or girl in the office. Go drive this thing for a week and tell us what you think. And then they would end up producing a terrible review because A, they didn't understand the subject material, and B, they didn't set it up right. That recent trip in the UK from John O'Groats to Land's End.
Oh, I haven't talked about it on my podcast because it's ridiculous. It was a Guardian writer. Yeah, I think it was the Guardian. Yeah.
And I know the guys who did the trip, and they had a great time, but the coverage of it was not necessarily the same. I also think our governments need to get in line. I'm working on the video right now. It's sitting behind me behind you guys in the window here. The Allegra Stratton,
the cop lady.
The what lady?
COP 26. Yeah.
COP 26.
Yes.
Funny enough, the Guardian rang me up yesterday to ask me about comments about electric cars, and actually published.
They printed your comments.
They printed my comments in full with no weird redactions or anything like that. Having a go at her about how she should listen to EV owners. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. So the big thing that this video is going to be going out later today. We're talking about the fact that this is a woman who basically, it feels like she's been living in a cave for the last 10 years, and none of the comments that she's made kind of jibe with today's modern EVs. So I actually went to a better route planner and I did those calculations, and I was like, okay, let's say she lives in Camden Town, because that's North London and it's a bit bougie and probably suitable for a civil servant. Let's say she's got a Renault Zoe 50, which is what, 27.5 grand, Nikk, after incentives and stuff.
Well, Will's in the chat, I'm sure he'll come along, but I think you can get one for about 20, 24, 25, I think.
Right, okay. So she could probably get a Renault Zoe pretty affordably. And you go, okay, that's got enough range to get her to Gloucester and back on a single charge. She can get to Wrexham, which is North Wales, on a single charge. She can get to the Peak District on a 15-minute rapid charge. And she can get to southern Scotland, which I went, okay, let's say Edinburgh, with a 45-minute charge. And if she was to buy like a Volkswagen ID3, which has got a faster charge rate, she'd be there and she'd, jobs are good. And she comes out and says, oh, well, I think I would need multiple long charging stops, and I'm not going to buy an EV unless they can charge in less than 30 minutes. And I'm like, lady, have you been paying attention to Tesla? Like, you could buy a Model 3 and do that trip and only spend 20 minutes charging, or even less. And that would be if you drove it like you stole it. So, I mean, that I think is the misinformation that bugs me the most. Our leaders need to get information right. If our leaders can't get the information right, how on earth is everybody else supposed to change to EVs?
When they came out with the 2035 becoming 2030 ban in this country, they're only EVs are allowed. It was a wonderful announcement until somebody said, "Oh, okay, so only EVs? Do you mean like plug-in hybrids or hybrids as well?" And they were like, "Oh, we'll get back to you." And then within a couple of days, they issued a new statement. Oh, yes, only going to be cars with a plug socket, and then they're all banned. And then someone said, "Oh, well, how far have the plugins? If you've got a 10 kilowatt hour battery, is that enough, or are they going to do 50 miles?" All right, no, we'll check with the press office and get back to you. It's like, like even they were making it up as they went along because it was a really
Right.
good headline. Like, oh, it's 2030, fantastic. Like Boris won't be in power then, but it sounds good now. It's like, yes, and so obviously the car industry was up in arms of what are you doing? And they had no idea what they were announcing, and they still don't have any idea. All they've said is it'll be banned 2030. Cars that can go I think the phrase is significant distance on zero emissions. So they've been tech agnostic, so hydrogen or whatever, but a significant distance. But what is that? And like they don't want to define it because none of them will be in that job in 2030. And it's like that's a huge frustration for industry as well that needs to, because they work on planning cycles of 30 years or 25 years, and it's like I find it so frustrating with generally.
The two things that frustrate me most about this industry, the three things, let's make it three things. Tesla fanboys, because I think they are spoiling EVs for everybody.
Agreed.
There is no reason why anybody there is no reason why anybody needs to buy a Tesla in order to be an EV fan.
It's only 0.5% of people who are vocal.
Yes. Everybody else who owns a Tesla is a wonderful person. I have met the Tesla owners in the UK who are really amazing, and in America who are amazing. It's just
they're fans, they're fans of the brand.
I can tell you now from doing, I've done a lot of videos about Tesla fanboys, and look, I've even got a Tesla decanter behind me, so I'm a self-confessed Tesla fanboy
and owner.
I hate, and I know I've got a Tesla for work, but the fanboys and the quality of cars, you can't hide it. It's a fact. I mean, if I have a Tesla, if I'm telling you the car's falling to pieces, if you don't have it, don't argue with me.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I cut you off after your first of three.
Right. Yeah. So the second is the absolute misinformation that is permeating throughout the industry, combined with this stupid insistence that every new electric car must be able to do 250, 300 miles on a charge, needs to have super fast rapid charging and all of that, when the reality is 90% of the population don't need it. And three, a complete and total disregard for anything involving the used car market. And I think I have to shout out to Eco Cars here up in Orkney, because they have single-handedly, I think, transformed the EV used car market in the UK. Jonathan has done an amazing job. And I think there are a couple of places in the US that are doing it too. Platt Auto in Portland, Oregon, another company that's doing an amazing job getting people behind the wheel of used EVs. But we have got to stop assuming that EVs are just a rich person's plaything. We need more accessibility. We need more equitability. And we need charging stations that are not in places that are bougie and expensive. We need charging stations everywhere, and we need accessibility everywhere, because without them, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Joe Biden's plans in the US to transition the fleet to electric, or whether we're talking about the UK government's plans to transition everybody over to zero emission vehicles by 2030. We cannot do it without that. And that focus, I think, is probably my biggest bugbear, even more than fanboys spoiling it, those small, tiny percentage of fanboys spoiling it. I'm talking about, we need to get everybody behind the wheel. And that means giving people education programs and training programs, helping kids in low-income communities train to become EV techs, train to work on the cars, making it more accessible for people to have on-street charging that they can work with. That is awesome. And we need more of that, because that, to me, is worth 1 million new features from Tesla. Tesla's done a great job. It's brought the industry to heal, kicking and screaming. And, let's be honest, a lot of automakers did not want to and still don't want to make EVs. So we cannot ignore what Tesla has done. But Tesla can lead the revolution, but it's going to take everybody else to fill that in. And we've got to make EVs more accessible and equitable, because without that, we might as well all just give up. I think that's probably kind of a good conclusion for me.
Well, if people have watched your content and they never thought about having a look, maybe they're thinking, as I'm saying this now, about having a look at patreon.com/transportevolved. I mean, it's an easy URL to remember, right? It's just patreon/transportevolved. And you can sign up to Starman level very easily and support what Nikki and her team do.
We have wonderful supporters on and yes, it is who you think it is on the Patreon levels at the top. Everyone says, every time we do a video, someone says, "Is that the?" And the answer is yes, it is.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You.
Oh, wait, it's lunchtime for you, so thank you very much for coming on and sharing your time with the audience. And we look forward to seeing you. Obviously, we saw you fully charged in the UK a little while ago, and then fully charged USA. What's the next thing that maybe your fans can see you at, or what are you thinking about travel?
We are not coming to fully charge unless somebody wants to send us 10 grand, which is how much it will be to get to the UK in September, because we've got to get the entire team over there, and the cost of plane tickets and putting people up in hotels or even Airbnbs, which is what we normally do, is pretty expensive. So we're not doing fully charged outside, I don't think. Everybody on the team is fully vaccinated, which is a good thing. Get your vaccine. If you've not, get your shot. It saves lives. If it doesn't save yours, it saves other people's. We are probably going to CES 2021. We go to CES every year. We've already started planning for that. We may not be going to fully charged live in the US. And the reason for that is that someone says the Transport Evolved shirts are fab. Like, there you go. That is one of our Transport Evolved shirts. If you go to transportevolved.com, you'll find all the links from there to everywhere else. We are probably not going to fully charged because it's in Texas. And Texas has been politically troubling this year in terms of its insistence on rolling back voting rights, its insistence on trying to demonize the transgender community and the lesbian gay community. It's also tried to roll back protections for people with regards to COVID. And while we love and support Robert intensely and the entire team at Fully Charged, we don't feel in good conscience that we could go to Texas and both feel safe as a team, but also support an area that is not politically aligned with what our vision of the world would be. So we are on the fence right now. We may be at Fully Charged live in Texas, but it's also likely that we might not. So those are the things, So brilliant. CES is our big thing.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you very much, Nikki, for joining us. It's
it's
really been a pleasure. And if anyone can go on Nikki's channel and go on a latest video and leave a nice positive comment.
How come?
That would be great. Just nice. Just everyone right now, go on the channel and go and leave a nice positive comment.
Find a negative comment and put, if you are a Brit, this is only if you're British, because there are some nations around the world don't want to be racist, but there are some nations who don't understand sarcasm, and Brits do. So just be sarcastic on a negative comment and see what happens. Yeah.
That's your
Troll
challenge.
The trolls.
That's your challenge for tonight's whatever it is. Thank you so much for watching again. We'll see you very soon. And Nick and I will be at Fully Charged outside. I'll be there for the first 2 days. Nick, you're giving a talk on the last day, right?
I am. I'm going to be there.
No, I won't be there on the last day. Yeah, sorry about that. It's the only reason. No, I've got family commitments.
Wait. When I told you I was doing Sunday, is that when you decided that you weren't coming Sunday?
Thank you very much for watching tonight. We'll see you very soon. Goodbye.